this is my story. Sorry, these are thoughts about my story, the Gorgon. And the Gorgon's going to be the next story that I work on. God Killer is pretty much finished. The stuff that I want to do with God Killer, it's stuff that that gets into like the technical side of things, and you don't have to watch it. You know, what I'm saying is it could be a little dull when I'm trying to decide. When I get to the point of deciding between specific words, punctuation, that kind of thing. Yeah. So, moving on. I'm moving on to another story, and this one's called the Gorgon. Actually, I've already thought about changing the title to this. So that is Lissel the Gorgon, and that's a slight homage to the great Peter S. Beagle. Not only did he write The Last Unicorn, but he also wrote a story called Lila the Werewolf. And even though that story is it's a bit of a satire, it never hurts to poke fun. It never hurts to poke fun at hipsters. Even though the story was written in the 70s, they had hipsters back then. Okay, so Lissel the Gorgon is a story that takes place in the post-human condition. That is, it takes place in the same setting as God Killer, Burlap Daughter, The Stars Are All Right, and some other stories that I've written. Well, Bobby, what happens when the hippies move into parts of New York City and start gentrifying it? You know, they aren't like smelly hippies anymore. You know, they're living in like brownstones and lofts now, and so it's supposed. So I think hipsters is fair. That's But go ahead and read Lila the Werewolf by Peter S. Beagle. Scene Kids. I can only say I don't know about that, but maybe. Okay. So Lissel the Gorgon, as I say in the introduction here, it kicked my ass. This is going to be, guess what? You're getting an essay tonight. Oh boy, an essay. But let me talk about essays a little bit first. Essays are not just things that English teachers like myself assign to students so that we have something to grade, and thus we can justify our meager paychecks to the administrators. Look, the students wrote all these essays. You know, essays have a long and proud history, and the word essay comes from an old French word, essayer, meaning to attempt. And it was Montaigne, the French master of the essay, who coined that term. And his purpose in writing essays was to understand things. You know, so I knew Lissel the Gorgon. I knew that story had kicked my ass, and I had to understand why. So I wrote this essay. Yeah. And guess what? It's a rough draft. I'm already looking at mistakes. You know, I wish I could look at my stuff once and just not see the mistakes, but there we go. Don't worry, you'll catch them too. But mostly, I think it's a pretty good essay, especially in the sense that helped me understand where I went wrong, and I think it'll help you um, understand a little more about the writing process. And that's part of the mission of this stream, anyways. So Larry, I'm curious. When you say that live YouTube is a pain in the ass to use, are you talking about as a streamer, or do you mean as a viewer? I'm kind of curious about that. Because I thought that viewing was pretty much simple. You just look at it and type in the comment section. Yeah. Oh, and so Larry, since you're here, I wanted to tell you that I did read your story, and it was funny. Maybe one day you can share it with a philosophy professor. I don't know how I'd react if it was about English. Wow, so Larry, I don't know what to say about that. It's but I think it's something to do with Canada. Yeah. No, I can't. I don't know. But anyways, let's take a look at the essay about my story. I'm writing the essay to attempt to understand where I went wrong. So it's analytical in nature, and also to consider what I can do right. Okay. So this story kicked my ass so much that I had to go back to my textbook, Sean Coyne's The Story Grid, What Good Editors Know, in order to evaluate my mess of a story. This broadcast will be about that process. Tomorrow's broadcast will be the inciting incident of the story. So the idea for the story was born out of my story, The Stars Are All Right, in which beach partiers summon an alien space god, and they have a good time, but the god takes one of them. I read that the partiers, and society in general, consider this to be a great honor, and it was just a throwaway line, but I wondered, what happens to the person who's raptured by an alien space god? Oh, McGlenn, how are you? Oh, so so Larry, I don't think it's too erudite. In fact, if I were to offer any criticism, I think you can have a lot more fun with really obscure philosophers, but yeah, no, I don't think it's too erudite, or rather, I think you kind of know me as a writer. I'm not too concerned about like the general audience. I'm just happy when somebody finds me. But anyways, McGlenn, I'm feeling pretty good. I kicked out this essay to help me understand where I went wrong with my Gorgon story. And so I think I've got a pretty good idea of where to go. Yeah. So, anyways, in the Stars All Right, somebody's raptured by an alien space god, and I wondered what happens to the person who is raptured. So I decided to write a story about the one person who had escaped that kidnapping. She had been changed. She already looked like a Gorgon, sort of. She had green scales instead of skin and tentacles on her head instead of hair. Now, after her escape, if anyone looked at her, that person turned to stone. But she didn't look any different. So, if you remember Burlap Daughter, this is Lissel. I'm getting into a habit of recycling characters. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's very environmentally friendly. No, seriously, I this setting, this post-human condition where the gods come and they warp humanity to some degree. I ultimately I want to collect that. I want to write like at least a dozen stories or so in that setting, and I want to turn that into a short story collection. But I like short story collections. I've always liked short story collections that feature some of the same characters. You know, I think that's pretty neat. So I'm a fan of Gino Diaz, and he did that, and This Is How You Lose Her. You know, and there's other examples. The technical term is a mosaic novel. I don't think I'm going for something novelistic in that. I'm just going for like the reader's experience. You go ahead and read one story, and then 3 stories later there's a character from that earlier story, and that's kind of fun. Oh, Zolarpy, thank you. That's so anyway, so this is Lissel, but she's older. I imagine that she's in her 20s. So the experience that she had as a secondary character in Burlap Daughter were around 10 years ago. Yeah. So anyways, if you'll remember, Lissel already had the green scales and the tentacles on her head. And actually, I came up with Lissel for the Gorgon before I put her in Burlap Daughter. And just if you're curious, she went into Burlap Daughter in degrees. Like in the first draft, I didn't even know she was present. But then I added her as a little girl, the 3-year-old who was crying about something at the birthday party. And then I added her as the 16-year-old friend who helps the main character escape. Yeah. So anyways, so poor Lissel, she looked like a Gorgon, but lots of people look like Gorgons. Lots of people get that scale, get those scales, and get tentacles. It's just one of the mutations of humanity, as a result of these alien gods. But once she escapes, she becomes more of a literal Gorgon in the sense that if anyone looks at her, that person turns to stone. Yeah. So this change and the terrifying nature of the experience is traumatic. Was she raped? The alien space god had her in his power and traumatized her with no regard for her as a living being with a mind, with feelings, with a soul. So yeah, the god raped her. Yeah, so now this is a good time to discuss the story of Medusa, who was transformed into a Gorgon. So one of the myths given in Ovid's Metamorphoses is that Medusa was a beautiful woman who was raped in the Temple of Minerva by Neptune. Minerva punished Medusa by turning her beautiful hair into snakes. And of course, she can also turn people to stone and so on. So let me be clear. I did not know that story. I didn't know how Medusa became Medusa. My friend Journey came across it when he was researching Medusa for a painting he was doing. If you remember when he was doing that painting, he probably told this story. My inspiration was a little different. It was the rape of Leda by Zeus, and the poem Leda and the Swan by Yeats, who posits that being raped by Zeus gave Leda oracular powers. She was able to see the future because Zeus raped her. Yeah. So in Journey, so I thought, well, if Lissel is essentially raped by the god, then she'll get these powers. You know. Yeah. So, anyways, when Journey told me the Medusa story, I realized that I was about to write that myth all over again. This myth has several terrible realities behind it. People who are raped sometimes gain a small measure of power if their rapist is powerful. The rapist feels remorse or twisted love, or simply wants to buy the victim's silence or post-rape consent, as if that would undo the rape. In all those cases, the rapist might pay off the victim or act on the victim's behalf. Another terrible reality is that the victim is often blamed for the rape. We see that happening in the Medusa myth. She gains power. Now, the reason she gains power is that Minerva curses her, but still, and we see that also with Leda. At least the way Yeats looks at it, that she gains power too, a little bit of power, a dash of it, from these beings much more powerful than they are, just imposing their will, Yeah. Okay. So I tried writing that story and I couldn't make it work. Here's the outline. Lissel is raptured and raped by the alien space god. She escapes. She is now cursed. Anyone who sees her visage turns to stone, painfully. She feels ostracized by society. The only people who accept her are the worshippers of the god who raped her because they believe that she was blessed. She lets the most devout ones see her, and they are turned to stone. They see it as devotion. In exchange, the Church of the God pays her a generous sum of money. She gets sick of it and goes back to the beach where she was raptured. She summons a god and exposes herself to him. She is no longer cursed. Okay, so that is the outline, and it's not that it's not interesting. There are interesting ideas there, but interesting ideas are not plot or conflict or theme or character. Interesting ideas can be secondary characters in novels or maybe show up in short stories. But a short story, at least the kind that I like to write, it needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. It needs resolution, transition, hook, a build-up, and a payoff. What I had was this. Someone does something bad to the protagonist. The protagonist is hurt and adapts poorly. Then the protagonist confronts the villain who undoes the curse because he realizes he's done something terrible. You can kind of see there that the agency is taken away from the protagonist. It and let me tell you, that's really hard to write. Yeah, it is. It is hard to write a story that you are fucking up, but there's an important truth in writing, and it's this. You got to keep on doing it. You have to. Sometimes you got to do the bad writing in order to do the good writing. And that is what I had to do. I had to write that stuff, in order to get to something better. Now, if I were wiser, maybe I wouldn't have had to write the whole thing, and I would have realized where I was going wrong. But I'm not wiser, so I had to write all of that. It didn't work out well, and here's the reason. Here's one reason it doesn't. So, aside from Lissel not having agency, aside from her as the main character being acted upon and not really acting, aside from the epiphany belonging to the god and not to her, this is an alien god, not a human one. Metaphorically, the alien god is not one of us, and instead represents unknown fate or random luck or cosmic forces or just the absurd shit that can happen to you at any time, for good or, in this case, for ill. A human god could be confronted, could be shamed, You know, in other words, I could write a story where where Medusa confronts Minerva and Neptune and gives them hell. Now, maybe they'd kill her or curse her in another way. The gods don't like being challenged, but you know, those gods could feel shame because they're basically super powerful humans. But this alien god is just that, alien to us, unknowable, inscrutable, and we're the same to it. So is it possible that alien gods could come to know us and we could come to know them? I mean, that's possible, like in a novel whose purpose it was to explore that relationship. But in this short story, the ending is pat. Yeah, it's nice and simple. She confronts the god and everything's better. Ta-da. You know. So that didn't work. Yeah. Yeah. So now what do I do with this story? Well, I go back to my textbook, the one I mentioned earlier. Sean Coyne's story grid, what good editors know. This is what I used to write God Killer, Burlap Daughter, other stories. Okay, so Coyne starts with genre, using the categories identified by McKee and El Wakil. You look up those two names and you'll find a good book on writing. Coyne defines genre as a label that tells the reader or audience what to expect. These expectations, these genres are as follows for the Gorgon. By the way, so Coyne is not using genre in the sense that we normally think of. You know, like basically he's not using it as like labels in a bookstore. You know, genre, because lots of things tell the reader what to expect. You know, certainly science fiction tells the reader what to expect, horror tells the reader what to expect, mystery tells the reader what to expect, but readers expect other things. And so let's take a look at them. You know, so the first thing, it might be obvious, but I went ahead and put it down. Time. How long is the story? How long is the story going to take to read? And this is going to be a short story. Then there's reality. How far is the audience going to have to suspend disbelief? And this is, I understand this story takes place in the future, but I haven't made the future in terms of technology that much different. So I do call it modern. And I'm not sure whether it's fantasy or reality bending science fiction. I mean, it's certainly not fantasy in the sense of Lord of the Rings, you know, but it is fantastical in the sense of there's an alien space god, you know, and a woman's interaction with him makes her, well, curses her, basically. Is that fantasy or is this reality bending science fiction? I'm not really sure. But there is some suspension of disbelief involved. So there we go. The style, the style is drama, and that is there are a few different styles listed in the story grid. Drama is one of them. Comedy is another. What's called literary is another. So literary fiction is either fiction that's poetic, like Nabokov's Pale Fire, or fiction that is metafiction, like Wallace's Infinite Jest. Metafiction is fiction about fiction, like characters who are aware that they're in a story. That's metafiction. You know, there's let's see, where was I? Sure. There's postmodern, the postmodern style, which is fragmented and subversive, like the stuff by a William Burroughs. If you've ever read a story that just throws out all the rules about what a story is, that's a postmodern story. And then there's the minimalist stories, and you know that I wonder if that's a genre I write in. Like maybe Burlap Daughter was minimalist. Um, um, so minimalist stories like the stories of Raymond Carver, of a lot of the literary short stories you see nowadays, in which there's a lot less detail. Actually, Carver has more detail than some modern writers. Um, you can go back to some of Hemingway's stories, are minimalist literary stories, like, for example, a clean, well-lit place, about two waiters, or The Hills Like White Elephants, about a man and a woman discussing whether the woman should have an abortion, and the word abortion is never used in that story because it's mostly just a bit of dialogue and they talk around it, since neither wants to say it. Yeah. So I don't think I'm quite minimalist. I think I'm a pretty standard. Right. This story. I mean, I get it's going to be science fiction or fantasy, some strange combo of the two, but I think my style is just going to be straight up drama. Classic short story style. Third person, omniscient, but I stick with one character, that kind of thing. Okay. So then the structure is like, what kind of plot do I have? And God Killer had what's called an arch plot. It's God Killer is an adventure story. Now, and it focuses on external conflict. You see a lot of that in God Killer. That's not to say there's not internal conflict, because there is. Stories can have both. But what's the focus? And God Killer's focus is on external conflict. He's got to go and kill a god. And in the meantime, he might kill some other people along the way. He's haunted by stuff. There's internal stuff he's trying to resolve, but the outside stuff is more important. In an arch plot, the main character is typically proactive. Maybe even like Crace, adventuresome. Okay. But this story, at least the way I see Lissel the Gorgon, is a mini plot because it focuses on internal conflict rather than external conflict. She's trying to process what she's been through, and so that's what the story is going to be about. Okay. However, there is an external content genre. There we go. It's horror. Yeah. So Coyne identifies these different genres and he calls it charges, but I look at it as like poles. Horror or maybe a continuum. On one side of horror, and it doesn't stay there for long, you have life. That is the happy stuff, the good stuff. And all the way on the other side of the horror story, you have a fate worse than death. And horror works on that continuum. Where are you going? Now, a lot of horror stories will end with a fate worse than death, like the movie Fallen, in which the main character fails. Oh, spoiler alert for like a 20-year-old movie, but the main character fails to stop Satan, and Satan wins. That's like a fate worse than death, right? But horror stories don't have to end like that. Like, for example, Dracula ends with life. You know, Dracula is defeated. That is how the original novel goes. Um, you know, he gets his ass kicked. Done. Okay. So, or the Babadook, where that great movie about this demon that's essentially gaslighting a single mother and her son, and you know it's not just death that he threatens, it's like taking their place, you know. Again, a fate worse than death, but again, the mother pulls it together at the end, and or at least a possibility of her pulling it together at the end takes us to the other side of life. Yeah, so this continuum, this tug of war between these two possibilities, is what creates a lot of the conflict in a horror story. And the internal, let's see. Sorry. Okay. The internal content genre, in this case, it's how this character perceives herself. And on one side, she sees herself as damaged and beyond repair, and on the other side is this necessity to see herself as a worthwhile person. And those two things those two things will provide the drama of her internal struggle. You know, yeah. So she has, externally, she has a desire to avoid harm. Now, maybe we all do, but considering her capacity to inflict it, that's a very real external desire. You know, she wants to avoid harm to herself, and she wants to avoid harming other people. Internally, you know, what she wants is peace, you know, but what she really needs is a positive peace. That is, she could find a negative peace through drugs, you know, through depression, but she needs a positive peace. She needs to come to terms with what happened to her. You know, success in this story for this character is this positive peace. And finally, the controlling idea or theme of this story is that there's great power in acceptance. And so let me tell you. And so let me tell you what happens to me. Like what happened when I did this part. So when I did all this, even the easy stuff like this, it's a short story. By doing all this, it helps me focus. It actually spurs my imagination. Believe it or not, considering this theme, that there's great power in acceptance. Well, what that means to me is that I'm going to have a lot of scenes where the conflict is about her being accepted, or her accepting herself, or other people accepting her, or accepting themselves too. And so you're going to see acceptance, or rejection, rejection, rejection throughout this story. You know, and so then at the end, and by the way, I think I'm gonna, you know, um, I'm pretty sure that I'm gonna have this character end on a positive note. Um, you know, I don't mind, killing characters. You know, like if Journey hadn't asked for Grace to survive, I might have killed him at the end, no problem. You know, but even though I can write really dark, bleak stuff, I don't think I have it in me to put a character through terrible paces and then, you know, and then snatch victory out of their grasp. I mean, to be honest, I could kill Lissel, but even if I killed her, I'd still make sure that she found that peace first. You know, you know, you know. So I don't think I would write the story this way. But for example, you know, she accepts herself, and then she uses her powers to save somebody, and then a nervous cop shoots her, and she's dead. You know, I'm probably not going to end it like that. But it's not death that bothers me here, because, like, the opposite of a fate worse, you know, basically, her not accepting herself is a fate worse than death, and I just want this character to find that positive peace. On a gut level, that is where I've wanted this story to go the entire time. And even when I wrote it the first time and I messed it up, you know, she still found her peace. Yeah. So anyways, throughout the story, as I have acceptance, or rejection, 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 you know, in the various scenes, repeating that theme over and over again, but in varied ways, is going to make the final scene of her accepting herself resonate a lot more. It'll make it a lot stronger. Yeah. And Azrael, hello. Everyone needs a little peace before we die. Yeah. Yeah, I think honestly, I think there's something to that. Yeah. So what else? What else can I tell you? You know, a question that is asked of a question that my students would always ask me is, did the writer know what the theme of the story was going to be before he or she wrote the story? And I can tell you that it's different for every writer. Like, for example, the great David Mamet says that he never writes with a theme, at least not one in mind. But if you've seen his works, you know, and you know, like, for example, you watch the movie House of Games, you know, and I think the theme is that deception leads to tragedy. You know, and I think it's pretty clear. You know, the people who deceive end up being deceived themselves, end up, you know, all those deceivers are shown to be like terrible people. You know, maybe kind of fun, but you know, but they're like narcissistic, maybe even sociopathic, and they just have these terrible lives. You know, now I'm not. I take him at his word. I believe that he doesn't write thinking to himself, "What's my theme?" You know, I believe he doesn't do that. And but I find it helpful because I build the story in layers. I build it in steps. You know, and doing that, I kind of need to know where I'm going. And because I skipped a lot of this process, or maybe didn't do it right the first time around, the story kicked my ass. So for me, the theme of tonight's show is that preparation is powerful. And yeah, so that's about it. Ladies and gentlemen, good night. I will see you later, perhaps on Journey's stream. Yeah. So good night.